Hello guys, Tops here. Today, how does FEARSOME work in Battle Bros? It is a tier 7 perk. The last tier means you can get it at level 8. Okay, any attack that inflicts at least one damage to hit points triggers a moral check for the opponent with a penalty equal to 20% of your resolve minus 10, as opposed to no penalty and only if at or above 15 points of damage. Okay. So normally you have to hit an opponent for 15 points of damage to trigger a moral check. That works for you, by the way, as well. Okay, with FEARSOME, you reduce your opponent's resolve by 20% of your own resolve minus 10. So if you have 50 resolve, your resolve is reduced by minus 10. So we have 40 and 20% of that, 20% of 40, now gets applied for a moral check. Ah, fuck, maybe I got my math wrong. It's the other way around. So let's say if you have 50 resolve, 20% of that. Oh, god damn it. Guys, I have to look it back. But basically it makes it more likely that your opponents lose a morale check because it gets reduced. And I think if you have 50 resolve, it gets reduced by minus 10, basically. And the maximum is minus 20. So if it caps at 110 resolve. God damn it. Guys, don't do math in public, man. Holy shit. Okay. I confused myself. I probably confused you as well. So basically, let's check out Turtle's guide, what he has to say. He does the complicated math, and he also has like the nice formula and everything. So as you can see, it is 60 resolve puts a minus 10 penalty on a target's resolve. See, that's the point. I was right. I just got the math wrong in my head. Right. So if you have 60 resolve, that resolve is getting reduced by minus 10. So now you have 50 resolve. And 50 resolve, 20% of that, which is 10 resolve, will be applied, will be subtracted from your opponent's moral. Let's say your opponent has 100 moral. You will subtract 10 of his moral, which is now his opponent has 90 moral. And now he has to pass the moral check with his 90 moral. And there's always a 5% chance of passing or succeeding a moral check in this game. So if your opponent has 100 moral, means he gets attacked without FEARSOME, he has a 95% chance of passing the moral check. But if you attack him with your 60 resolve bro, you apply the minus 10 resolve penalty to him. So now he has 90 resolve. And he has to check the moral check at 90 resolve. So now he has a 10% chance of failing this, or only a 90% chance of succeeding. So you basically doubled the chance that your opponent will fail a moral check. Okay, that's the math behind that. I hope I didn't confuse you too much, especially if you are new. I definitely confused myself. I will link Turtle's guide down below. And you can read it for yourself because it's a lot of math. So, what does it do? It reduces your opponent's moral and makes it more likely that he will fail a moral check. That's a good thing. FEARSOME is a strong debuff if it works, because if your opponent drops one stage in moral, his stats are getting reduced by minus 10. So now he has minus 10 melee skill, minus 10 melee defense, range skill, resolve. His stats are getting reduced by minus 10%. So he's wavering, right? So there are 5 tiers of moral. You can be confident, which is plus 10% to all of your stats. You can be steady, which is 0. You are neutral. You can be wavering, which is 10%, minus 10% to your stats. The next tier is breaking, which is minus 20% stat. And the last tier is fleeing, where it's like minus 30% to your stats, and you are also not able to control your character anymore. He tries to run away from the battlefield. You have to rally him with your bannerman. Okay, so Fearsome is a very strong debuff if Fearsome works. The downside to that is a lot of enemies have really high resolve. Ancient Undead and Undeads are completely immune because they don't have resolve. You cannot Fearsome them. Most beasts have way above 100 resolve, so even with the Fearsome penalty, you do not get them below the 95% threshold, and a lot of them don't have armor, so you don't benefit from the only have to do 1 hit point damage thing. So versus 3 out of 6 faction in this game, Fearsome does almost nothing. And then if you go to other factions, it tends to do not much versus Barbarians, because Barbarians have really, really high resolve. And yes, if you bring a Barbarian down, like a Chosen, for instance, has 90 resolve. If you reduce his resolve by 10 for the moral check, again, he goes from 10% failure to 20% failure. So you basically have doubled the chance of him failing a moral check. Still, most Chosens will die before they flee. It is really unlikely that you get a Chosen to flee. It's basically you are fishing for like low percentages a lot of the times. But if you have like a plethora of something, so like a large group of weak entities, goblins, brigands, like single entities that are easy to kill, easy to injure, and don't have high resolve, right? So like I think brigands have around 50, goblins also like around 50, not that high. So if they are really easy to hit, and it's easy to trigger the check, and every time an opponent fails a moral check, that triggers moral checks for opponents around him, right? So you can there's a chain reaction that you can do with Fearsome. You basically trigger a bunch of negative moral checks, or you can trigger a bunch of negative moral checks. You can do this without Fearsome, by the way. It is just more likely to happen if you have Fearsome. And because you are fishing for like these moral breaks and these chain reactions, the more Fearsome users you have on your team, the better. And also, the more attacks you have, the better. So Fearsome tends to be better with AoE attacks or with weapons that attack more than once per turn, and it's less better on those big two-handers who can only attack once per turn. Stacking damage on big two-handers is, in my opinion, always better than going for Fearsome. But Fearsome is better with AoE, like guns, sword lances, greatswords, or with one-handed weapons, like spears, swords, axes, hammers, all the one-handed weapons, right? Triple or potentially triple Fearsome from daggers. Has high synergy with weapons that do direct HP damage. So the puncture attack from the dagger will guaranteed proc a moral check. The hammer attack from the one-handed hammer always does at least 10 hit point damage. Also the two-handed reach hammer does that. So there you will have a guaranteed moral check as well. Three-headed flail, handgun. So the gun can hit up to 6 targets. Daggers has 3 attacks per turn, and so on and so forth. Better with AoE, right? Also works with the Splitman, because the two-handed axe, the Splitman can check Fearsome basically twice, theoretically, if it works. Warhammer, Warbow, Shield Bros with hammer for Fearsome. Spearwall, damage is too weak. Also, the Fearsome can only proc once if for every opponent. So like you can only proc the Fearsome for one opponent. No, not for one, for every opponent once that steps on your field. So if you proc it once, you only do 1 damage. And after that, if he comes again, you have to do the 15 hit point damage. So note, that's important to note there. If you invest more in resolve, again, the maximum penalty is 110. So if you go from, let's say you have 60 resolve, you do a -10 penalty to resolve. If you have 110 resolve, you do -20 penalty to resolve. So having more resolve increases the chance of your fearsome success. Not by a lot, but it increases this. And it's a nice pickup on your Bannerman because you always have 100 resolve. I will link this guide down below so you can check it for yourself. We will check in-game now. And I have made a lot of specific videos against what enemies fearsome is good and against what enemy fearsome is not so good. And I think fearsome is a strong debuff, but because it doesn't work against a lot of opponents, it's overall pretty balanced. And there are countermeasures for fearsome. So, and I think that's why I think fearsome is completely overrated, because a lot of people think it's broken. That's absolutely not the case. It's overall a very balanced perk. It has a lot of upsides, but it has also a lot of downsides, because like a lot of enemies are immune to that. So very balanced perk, right? And if you, I think it's important that you know exactly against what fearsome is good, against what fearsome is bad, and where are the synergies, right? So you have the synergy with AoE, like great swords, swordlands, because you can trigger multiple moral checks. Has synergy with Berserk, because you attack more than once with Berserk. You can AoE more than once with Berserk if you kill an opponent, right? Has synergy with High Resolve, so nice pickup on a Bannerman, but not a must-have. And has nice synergy with the gun, who can hit up to 6 targets, and that I can Berserk and then do it again potentially, right? And yeah, for me, fearsome is basically playing the slot machine, fishing for the moral breaks, fishing for the fleeing status, right? And that tends to be better versus opponents that are in large quantities and have weak morale. Brigands, noble houses, and nomads are the fights, and goblins, where it's most of the time the best. Note, opponent leaders have an aura that is basically similar to the banner aura, which gives them inspired by nearby leader, which is a buff that gives them plus 15% of their base resolve. So a lot of opponents in-game tend to have higher resolve. Stuff like noble houses, they have bannermans, so they can rally the fleeing troops. So fearsome tends to be not that strong versus them, unless you can kill the bannerman. Also, orc warriors can rally and have fearsome themselves with their war cry. So if you make an orc flee, an orc warlord can potentially rally them back into the fight. Okay. Okay. That's a lot of stuff, I know. Orcs don't have low morale. They actually have pretty high morale. I think orc youngs have like 65 or something. Warriors have 75. Berserkers have 90. So berserkers have really high resolve. Most berserkers will die before they flee. Yeah, there's also the lower the hit points are, the less likely you are to pass a moral check. So that means the more hit points an opponent has, the more likely it is that he will have to pass a lot of moral checks, and the lower his hit points get, the more likely it is for him to lose this moral check and drop to breaking, wavering, fleeing, right? So orcs have a lot of hit points, and they are easy to hit. They have good morale base, and they can get inspired by the orc warlord and rally by the orc warlord. But because they have so many hit points, you will hit them a lot. They will start dropping moral. It is really likely that they will start dropping moral. At least to orc youngs. It's really unlikely for orc berserkers, because again, 90 plus resolve, when they are inspired by the warlord that is close by. Warriors will eventually proc moral checks. The problem is warriors have a shit ton of armor. A lot of the time they have 400 body and head armor, so it is hard to, for a lot of weapons, it's even hard to do 1 hit point damage through that armor. So it might take a while until you trigger Fearsome. And in that case, stuff like Overwhelm might be the better debuff perk, because you can just, Overwhelm just works as long as you are faster than your opponents. And I really like the combination on my guns to go Fearsome and Overwhelm. So I have the best of both worlds. I can Fearsome my opponents, the opponents that aren't immune to Fearsome, and if this doesn't work, I can still Overwhelm them for minus 10% stats. So I hyper debuff my opponents. And at some point, if I play the slot machine enough, I will proc Fearsome checks, my opponents will eventually fee. It makes it much easier for my frontliners to A, survive, and B, deal more damage, because armor got stripped and moral got dropped and Overwhelm and all that stuff. So I really like Fearsome on my gunners. You can pick up Fearsome on AoE brothers. You can potentially pick them up on like Spear Guy, although that has its limits, as already stated. Can be okay on archers to debuff at range. Generally, on all range bros, Fearsome is not a bad pickup. Yeah, but especially on big two-handers, I would rather take additional damage perks like Headhunter and Executioner, Killing Frenzy, Berserk to just stack up damage, because most of the time I only hit once. And like hitting twice with like Headhunter, Killing Frenzy and Executioner is just more than just Berserk, Fearsome, right? So especially for two-handed weapons, Killing Frenzy, Headhunter, Executioner is just better than Fearsome, in my opinion. Better synergy. But Fearsome has better synergy with AoE, better synergy with ranged, better synergy with high resolve. And if you can combine that with high initiative Overwhelm, you get a very strong debuff brother. All right, I talked a lot. There's a lot to talk about Fearsome. I hope I don't confuse you too much. I've made multiple videos on how Fearsome works and what Fearsome is good against. I recommend you watch that if you don't know it already. And if you have any questions or recommendations, or your comments that disagree, please write it down in the comments below. I will see you there. Thank you guys so much for watching if you made it until here, and yeah, have a nice day. Bye bye.